I cannot dance upon my toes. No man instructed me, but oftentimes among my mind, a glee possesseth me that, had I ballet knowledge, would put itself abroad in pirouette to lance a trooper, lay a prima man. And though I have no gown of gauze, nor ringlet to my hair, nor hop to audiences like birds would claw upon the air, nor any know I know the art I mention easy here, nor any placard boast me it's full as opera. That's Emily Dickinson, speaking of our common fantasy of wanting to dance ballet. My aspiration as a ballerina was cut short. When I was a little girl, I was at Madame Lamone's studio, and my father took off work one afternoon to see his budding ballerina. So he comes to the studios, and everybody's going like this, and I'm going like this. And they're going up, and I'm going down. And he took me home, and that was my last lesson. So I ended up as a professor. But the aspiration of ballet is still with me. I want to thank you, Hannah and Donna, for the honor and thrill of joining you here at ground zero of your amazing work that lifts and whirls and swirls us. Each of you here in your own way lifts, does this work in these times for our community. It lifts us with grace against all the forces that would weigh us down in these days and ever since we got here, being human. Ballet Fantastique. Once again, you have your finger on the pulse. For what ails us, depletes and defeats us, challenges us, inspires us, giving us a magic mirror of stories in which we see ourselves. We are seeing our deepest and most private aspirations. You see us, what we would dare to believe about ourselves. Welcome. Our Odysseus's, our Cleopatras, our Cinderellas, our Aladdins, our secret Poe or Jane Austen. Stories, but my opinion, most of all, Beauty and the Beast. Why? Why now? Why does this story matter? Once upon a time, a tale as old as time, I was teaching the power of story at California State University, Monterey Bay, to first-year students. And I had the best story of all, Beauty and the Beast. So I decided to begin with a prompt that I thought was a slam dunk. Who do you identify with in Beauty and the Beast? And I was working with the Disney version, and I thought everyone would say Belle, because this was a class about story and reading and writing, and that they would say Belle because she's the hero. She's strong and resilient and triumphant. She has tune. She has sass. She's rebellious and a critical thinker. She's a reader. She represents story and art, and that's what we're all about. So this was going to frame our course, the value of reading and writing and story that give us visions of a larger world outside ourselves. But as our imaginations are engaged, we see others. We identify. learn empathy. Belle sees the good in the beast. Belle saves the beast, saves the day because of her love of story, her ability to read a text. She's able to be resilient in captivity, and her imagination, her learned power to make of herself a story and believe in a happy ending. This gives her hope. Her teaching the beast a hopeless case transforms him. She makes him human through reading, art, imagination. She saves her life and his. Who would it be, Bill? Well, for when? Not my students. In typed and written essays handed in, each one said they identified with the beast. Well now, I heard how each was secretly the beast, terrible, unloved, unlovable, and this was a story about identifying with your inner beast. Yes to his rage, yes to his despair. The poor beast. Everyone was this beast. And because he disrespected an old woman holding a rose, he's cursed. He's told if he isn't loved, and if he cannot love by the age of 21 manhood, he will die as a human being, and he will remain beast forever. The idea that he could be loved and transformed by love gives hope. This story for the beast identity, in which he lives as much a captive as Bill is a captive in his home. It's the power of story to forgive, of empathy and compassion that redeem us, our humanity. So, if we don't figure out a way to love and to be loved in our real selves, we die. Our human selves. But what Dr. B is being human in this story, well, all we've got in the plot is loving. It's loving, it's seeing the beauty and the good in someone. That's the happy ending, the moral. How to see beauty. Bill is French for beauty. And I think of that in our days. I think of how we think of a tree, or a person, or a rose. How we see them is a matter of their and our life and death. If you are seen as something to fear, something wild, something frightful and strange and other, then you're shut up, you're silenced, walled up, walled out. But they felt hope. There's hope for me. So I was taught beauty and the beast. Albert Einstein, considered the resident genius of the 20th century and still in the headlines and hours, was asked by a woman, I want my son to be an Einstein. And he goes, oh, for heaven's sakes, no, of course you don't. She goes, no, I do, really. I want my son to be an Einstein like you. He goes, believe me, you don't want that. She goes, I do. What should I give him to read to become an Einstein? And he says, oh, well, no, there's no way. She goes, please, tell me something to read. And he said, okay, fairy tales. She said, Mr. Einstein, I'm serious. You're disrespecting me. told me what I could give him to read. And he said, fairy tales. Okay, fairy tales. But after fairy tales, what? And he said, more fairy tales. So, what was in the fairy tale that Einstein, who came up with new ways to see our world, felt created him? And he was being biographical in this sense. That is what he read as a child when they thought he was stupid, couldn't speak. Those stories gave him hope that you could reason, you could imagine your way out of a situation of monstrous forces. In The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim, he says that stories teach children that there are monstrous forces, but the littlest, the least powerful, the most deprived and abused, yes, these fairy tales depict children starving, abandoned, neglected, sacrificed, held captive, abused physically, emotionally, verbally, at the mercy of witches and ogres and beasts. The littlest person can persevere, can triumph, and can live happily ever after. These are stories of resilience that teach how to navigate this frightening world, how to treat nature, each other, and earth. And profoundly, as in Beauty and the Beast, perhaps the oldest and most global and wisest of them all, we have stories of growing up, coming of age, and being human. In this story, most of all, in all the versions, we have the question, what does it mean to be human? Let's back up and see what we have here and what is going to be performed. An ancient story. In this version, based on The Scarlet Flower by Sergei Oxykov from the 1856 story, whose author said, I am writing a story which in my childhood I knew by heart. He was ill, and his family's housekeeper sat by the stove, and to cure him and keep him alive, she told him these stories. And in this story, a father leaves his 3 daughters at home and goes to seek his fortune. His youngest daughter, he asks all of them, what do you want me to bring back? And they say, oh, the most beautiful riches. But his youngest daughter says, I just want you to bring me the most beautiful red flower. He's robbed, he's waylaid, he escapes to a magic castle, it's empty. He sees the most beautiful rose, and he picks it. And immediately, he's accosted by the beast of the forest, the one joy of the beast's life, nature. He demands a sacrifice. The youngest daughter is called into service, since it's she who wanted to be the rose. She lives happily and splendidly, and she wants to see her host. He's been cursed, and he has to live in the disguise of a beast. And he has to learn how to live and be lived. And he's kinder and kinder to her, and they're together. And at the end of every meal, he asks her to marry him. She demurs, no. So, he lets her visit her dad, but she has to come back in 3 days or he'll die. Because his love for her was so great, he couldn't bear to live without her. So he's learned to live. He loves her more than himself. She agrees she'll come back, but her sisters conspire to delay her out of envy. And when she does come back, he's dying, the scarlet flower lying nearby. She cries out that she loves him, that he is her true love. She weeps her tears on him, and voila! Let us consider this as BFan asks us to do. We must be loved, not in our cleaned-up adult come-of-age version, all mature and suave and beautiful, but in our true beastly state. And it is in this compassionate love that transforms our beast, that redeems us. This love that sees through our hairiness. Isn't this our most elemental fantasy, fantastique? To be loved for our true selves, whom we fear and know to be bestial, which actually is beautiful. Emily Dickinson said, "I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd advertise, you know." She invites us in through her art to join in her secret identity of being unknown for her real self. She's living in disguise as a nobody, a person of no value, unseen. She, a woman of talent and genius, who calls herself Uncle Homely, Emily Jumbo, said, "My life had stood a loaded gun in corners till the day its owner passed, identified, and carried me away. And now by day I hunt for him. She's the beast as a poet. And Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, he can't be seen as he is as a black man. He's a ghost, he's a monster, a beast." So many stories of people not driven seen. To be seen and loved for oneself. Isn't that all our fantasy, fantastique? So when Emily Dickinson wrote, "At last, to be identified," isn't that us? Oh, see me, love me. Isn't that what the earth needs now and says to us every day when it makes a bud or a rainbow or a petal? How is Beauty and the Beast relevant today? As relevant as our current poet laureate, Joy Harjo, writing a book called Waiting to be Human. This is clearly still in our minds after all these years. How can we see other? This is the most pressing issue in our political culture, our global culture, and that includes animals and plants and our very earth, historically and today. Beasts, aliens, the rose, an ancient symbol in religions and culture, symbol of nature, is the version of the scarlet flower. Its picking is the undoing of the Father, the violation of earth, cursing us. This is the topic of our first recorded story, Gilgamesh, the fifth king of Uruk in Iraq, who cuts down the trees to build himself an ever higher wall. And he finally convinces his sidekick Enkidu to join him at the cedar forest and to kill Humbaba, the guardian of the forest, and then uproot the trees all the way to the Euphrates. For this sin, he loses his godlike immortality and must be human, aka mortal, aka die, and he weeps, "Why me? It was only a tree." This was our first story, written painstakingly with stilos on clay tiles, 45,000 in cuneiform. And think how many stories have this idea of what happens if you violate nature. Certainly our fairy tales, Rapunzel, where the witch's garden greens are stolen and she curses the father. He must go into the woods, as Stephen Sondheim said, to find redemption. Perhaps we can see the rose as a symbol that relates to our consciousness and conscience of climate change and the Anthropocene, of the beauty of our world and what we must protect. That story, Gilgamesh, was 5,000 years ago, and this story, so many versions over thousands of years, from China, Tibet, Russia, Germany. But reading, telling ourselves stories of what it means to be us, what it feels like, art, ballet, can make us see its preciousness, teach us how and why to see the beauty in our world and each other, so we don't want these beasts we have come to know and to live, to die, so that we would weep at its loss. It's a matter of life and death to see this way. The greeny flower asphodel, Dante's flower in hell, called by William Carlos Williams, he says, "My heart rouses, thinking to bring you news that concerns you and concerns many men. It is difficult to get the news from despised poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. This news of the flower we so need, this art, we don't have to be without it, because we have Ballet Fantastique, giving us Beauty and the Beast. Oh, thank you, beloved BFan. Long live your beauty.